So, I'm sitting here, eating this banana, trying to figure out what the fuck I'm going to review next. And I'm sitting here, deep in thought, and in the process, I'm really disappointed in myself for not knowing what the hell I'm going to do next. Should I read something old? Or from this season? This season! Let's go ahead and talk about last season's anime. And, we're on the topic of disappointment. Where can we go from here? I don't know about you guys, but when I have a character named Kuroneko, it's hard for me to take her serious in an atmosphere that's super dark just because I think of, other characters. What exactly is Brynhildr in the Darkness, you might ask? It's this anime from last season telling the story of a boy named Ryota Murakami and his experience with witches. And no, these aren't, your typical magic-throwing witches or the ones you'd expect from something like Madoka. These ones are actually girls with supernatural powers given to them through science that nobody really understands. While this may sound cool, this comes at a cost because they have to take a certain drug, and if they don't take it within a certain period of time, they will slowly die away. And on top of that, they have metal things in the back of their neck that if they get ejected, they will melt. So the uncertainty about this and what to do in this scenario kind of creates a sort of dark survival story that's pretty interesting when it wants to be, especially towards the earlier half of the show. The problem with this is that the show flip-flops from those really dark, super interesting seinen moments to happy-go-lucky harem antics at times, and that's kind of annoying and kind of offsets the mood. It just feels like something that doesn't really belong there. So yeah, the show has a hard time deciding what exactly it wants to be sometimes. I've already mentioned our main character who has a photographic memory, which is really convenient at times. We also have our other character, not Kuroneko, who's a transfer student and also the first witch that he encounters, on top of other characters like Steve Hawking's daughter, and two that are just there for fan service. Yeah, to be honest, the characters in the show, while when it gets dark and gritty, can be interesting, but are overall not particularly an interesting part of the series. And if you know me, I am somebody who really likes interesting characters because they help drive the show to being a good show. This, of course, isn't the case all the time. Like I said, when it gets dark and serious and, when there's things on the line, things can be really interesting. But of course, this disappears at times when you have the smooth switches that happen randomly. The show's animation itself is actually pretty mediocre for the most part. It's very simplistic and doesn't really do anything to make itself stand out, which is kind of sad. Because I feel like something with this kind of premise could have some really interesting art and really interesting style if given to the right hands. But unfortunately, I remain disappointed in this. The soundtrack to this series is mostly forgettable, except for maybe the first opening, which is actually instrumental, which I don't see enough of in anime anymore. The first opening reminds me a lot of Monsters opening, as in it's super dark, instrumental, and sets the dark atmosphere very nicely. But otherwise, there's no particular songs in the show that you're gonna want to go out of your way to get. Ultimately, I label this as a disappointment from the beginning because it does have some great ideas, and when it wants to be a super dark, serious seinen, it does a pretty good job. But unfortunately, it falls victim to inconsistent mood swinging, some really boring characters, and when it comes to plot, Jesus, this show starts out good and has senses of mystery, but unfortunately there are parts that have pacing that feel a bit off, and the conclusion will make you feel like it's one of those shows that ends by saying, fuck you, go read the manga instead. There are particular parts of the conclusion I won't say, but there are parts that do not get necessarily explained. You kind of just have to either guess or wonder what the hell actually happened. So ultimately, the show has promise, but just doesn't deliver everywhere it needs to. And because of this, I have to give the show a 6 out of 10. It isn't necessarily an awful show. I may make it sound like it's, awful, but it just doesn't have a lot of things that make it memorable. And there are just a few problems that really set it from being one of the more interesting shows this season.